Fufeng had found his niche. The gree of the mines was pulling power from dual sources, a nuclear reactor and geothermal piping deep in the hollows below. Fufeng had his pick of empty tunnels to convert into grow dens. His custom spore strawberries grew wild in any damp spot that light shone. To fertilize the flowers, he found bees, and their aversion to darkness disallowed them from going from one grow to the other. He spliced in several other nocturnal species, mixing them until he got a line capable of echolocation and nocturnal behaviors. The failures he dumped into the waste outlet, pouring into the valley below the mountain. He loved his lab. The two humans spent a lot of time making him new machines, smelting glassware for him, and assisting in his work. He made a line of beans for protein, but upon reaching maturity the seed pods erupted as the beans inside wormed their way out as they attempted to crawl away. He watched, waiting for Stuart and Stella to freak out him. They never did. Stella caught a few and cooked them. She ended up baking them in bulk. Now the two humans carry them around for snacks throughout the day. Stuart woke up early, having passed out early from drinking too much strawberry wine. He walked into the lab, waving at the still busy Finnegan. "Morning, Fufeng. What's the project today?" Fufeng looked up from the surgical table. "Working on Malgam." He looked back down and began cutting into a creature spread out on the operating table. Stuart walked over to test crop of beans and pulled a wiggling one out of a pod and popped it into his mouth. "You making any progress? I've had to toss a dozen of those things out already." Fufeng, making an incision, replied, "I learn with everyone that I make." Stuart sat down on his favorite stool, eating another worm bean. "Remember that one last week with the fangs? The really aggressive one?" Fufeng bobbed his ears and looked at Stuart. "Yeah, that one had a lot of human gene lines spread throughout. Stella had fun fighting that one, didn't she?" Stuart nodded. "Yeah, she punched the freak right in the face. She was laughing about it last night." "You two have been enjoying that fermented juice quite often. It dulls you both. Why do you imbibe it?" the Finnegan asked. Stuart looked down at one of the beans trying to crawl out of his hand. "We're old, Fufeng. Our bodies may not show it, but we've been through quite a lot over the years." He looked up at him. "We like being dulled sometimes. It eases us, helps us remember how to laugh." "It helps you have fun?" Stuart nodded. "It helps us forget our worries long enough to remember what brings us joy." Fufeng looked back down at his dissection subject. "Curious effect. Your species is quite fond of poisons. I'm glad you two are so strong. I had a friend on Twain that was human. Something I made killed him, and I worry about you two being around my work." Stuart got up and walked over to the table. He looked down at the deceased creature splayed out. "That's the thing, Fufeng. It's work. You're learning. This thing, Malgam, this project is complex." He traced out the lines on the cut-open face. "I'm not going to lie, genetics is way beyond me. I get bones, organs, and stuff, but the coding for it is gibberish to me. The fact that you are even trying to make something like this is amazing." Fufeng slowly moved his ears and looked up at him. "I hope it will be. You two have already helped me so much. If I could make a stable helper for us, it would be amazing." Stuart laughed. "No, it already is amazing. You, trying, making things, learning, all of it. It's amazing." Stella loved getting to punch that thing. He stood up and started toward the door. "Keep at it, Fufeng. I'm going to go check the bean room for more of these critters. Maybe wake up Stella." Fufeng swiveled on his chair. "You going to be by the grease chamber?" Stuart stopped in the door and turned toward him. "Could, why?" Fufeng tilted his head a bit. "That portion of the orbital should be making skyfall today. You still feeling bad about that?" Fufeng nodded, still tilting his head. "They had to purge a significant portion of the station due to me." "Yeah." Stuart lowered his head. "I'll go by. Ask old Gree for an update." Fufeng lifted his head. "Thank you." "No problem, little bud. Don't beat yourself up about it. Fuck with life and it can bite you. You gotta be ready to bite back. Fufang watched as the door shut behind him. He looked back down at the flayed creature on the table. No more biting anyone. Stuart and Stella were busy at the working face. Stella was at a terminal operating a boring machine, while Stuart operated a sealing rig securing the exposed cuts. Stella monitored the loose ore filing back through the conveyor system to the gree of the mine's forges. They were having to be more mindful of what they dug out now, since they were reducing surface waste dumping. Everything mined out and to be put to purpose. They had dug out large storerooms for elemental consolidation. Massive pumps were drawing out vapor seeps, and the two humans had to remain in their atmosphere suits. Stuart sent her a text asking if she was ready for lunch yet. Stella powered down the bore and stepped down from the terminal. Yeah, I pulled a couple potatoes up yesterday. You want me to bake them up? Stuart smiled at her through his visor. Yeah. You want me to reheat that amalgam steak? Hey, she scrunched up her face. It was chewy yesterday. I can only imagine how much worse it'll be today. It's protein. So are the worm beans, and I think I'll stick to them. He shrugged. All right, beans and potatoes today. He hopped onto the cart and the two sped down the tunnel toward the Gree roots. They stopped near the door, got out, and entered into the main habitation complex. Stuart patted the roots and branches on the ceiling. Hey, Gree, it replied, huffing through the vents. Hello, humans. You hit a good deposit today. Stella pulled off her helmet and laughed. Yeah, we chewed through that metal seam. I was worried the bits wouldn't hold up. The new design is working well then? The Gree asked. Stuart stripped down to his undergarments and started walking the hall, Stella following him. Stuart ran his hand down the length of the wall branches. Yeah, you did well with it. So far it's holding up. Good. I am glad, the Gree said. The two humans turned down the next hall and walked into the lunchroom. Fufang was already there and stood up. A brown thing stood up next to him. Stuart laughed and walked over. He looked at Fufang and then down at the new creature. Is this? Did you finally? Fufang bowed his head, nodding. Say hello, Malcolm. The brown, saggy-skinned creature bowed askew toward the two humans. Malcolm, it said. Fufang looked at Stella and Stuart. Its vocal capabilities are limited. It can perform simple orders, though. Fufang pointed toward the kitchen. Go get the baked potatoes. The creature started hobbling toward the kitchen. Malcolm, Malcolm, Malcolm. It returned with a tray with 2 aluminum-wrapped potatoes. Stella looked at its curled hands as they steamed from the hot tray. Is it getting hurt? Fufang pointed at one of the tables. Set it down there. Malcolm, the creature said and sat the cooking tray down. Fufang gently took its hands and inspected them. Curse it. It carried it hot. Stuart sat at the table. Well, it didn't complain. I'm impressed. Stella pulled her hot potato over and opened it. Well, all it says is Malcolm. It may have been complaining. Fufang went into the kitchen and returned with a damp cloth. He started wrapping the creature's hand. He looked up at the two humans. Still a few things to work on. Stuart chewed up a portion of starchy potato and smiled at Fufang. Yes, but huge success, bud. You got you a helper. Fufang bobbed his ears. First of many, I hope. Finally, I have a functioning prototype. Stella pulled some potato free and handed it over to the creature. Here, eat. The Malgam reached out with its burnt hands and took the offered food. It pushed the mush into his gummy mouth and started masticating it. Stella looked at Fufang. Am I going to get to punch this one? Fufang shook his head awkwardly. No, this one is proving non-violent and quite subservient. Stuart took a bite of worm beans. He chewed them up and pointed a bit with his fork. What's the secret? You figured out something. Fufang bobbed his ears and adjusted himself in the seat. I did. The grape juice had a human study filed away in her research notes. You familiar with domestication? Stella laughed. Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, you're human. Of course you'd know. Well, you know pets? Stuart poked more worm beans with his fork. Yeah, we've had pets. Fufang tilted his head a bit. Well, I did not. It is weird to me, but it is applicable. There are genes found in domesticated earth creatures that make them amenable. I tried 17 different variables, and he is the one proved most stable. Stella leaned over, looking at it. So he's got like dog DNA in him or something? Fufang looked at her. Dog? I don't know. But I found something called a Labrador, and its mental mapping helped with both instruction and docility. Stuart laughed and pointed in a circle at the amalgam. So you made a fleshy brown skin thing with a dog brain. Fufang looked at the amalgam. Well, yes, maybe. It is brown and has skin. Is a Labrador a dog, then? Stella nodded, palming a ball of potato into her mouth. Yup. Well, then that is what I made. I think it can be useful. Stuart chuckled. I'm sure it will be. First of many, right? Fufang stood up and motioned for the amalgam to follow. Yeah, I'll try to make them more capable in future iterations. Stella pivoted in her seat, pointing. Hold up. What else is in him? Fufang looked down at the short, stubby creature, and then back at her. Little bit of lots of things. I kept hitting error codes, so I kept tacking things in to fix it until it worked. Stella looked at Stuart, eyebrow raised. Stuart nodded. Fufang agree. We're going to keep this thing a secret, all right? The Gree of the Mines replied through the ceiling vents. Of course. We do have leeway as this is not a clouder world, but it would be smart to not draw attention. Fufang bobbed his ears. Yeah, good point. I always forget stupid laws. I just like making. Stella smiled. Well, keep at it. You're making good progress. She waved at the amalgam as it walked away, looking over its shoulder at her. Bye, little guy. Sorry about your hands. Amalgam, it said as it walked out the door with Fufang. Stuart leaned into Stella. Think that one will be chewy? She laughed. No. Did you see the fat rolls on it? I bet it tastes like pork. He chuckled with her. The Gree of the Mines had alerted Stuart, Stella, and Fufang immediately after detecting the banging rhythm in the garage. Stuart and Stella stood 50 feet from the door, weapons aimed. Fufang stood near the inner door with a data slate in his hand. He typed in a command and 4 large amalgams walked across the garage and stopped beside the 2 humans. Stuart looked back at him. If it's Callie, those things are just potential tools for her. Fufang tilted his head. Well, I can try. Stuart rolled his eyes and focused back at the door. All right, Gree. Open her up. The doors squealed as they parted open. Stella readied herself, and then her eyes widened. Standing in the light were 7 starfish peoples. The creatures were holding hands and staring at them. The center one waited for the doors to finish opening, and then spoke. Hello, Stella and Stuart. Stuart noted the red thread trailing behind the creatures along the ground. He looked up at the center one. Callie? Callie and SFP. We have worked out a kind of communal capability. They are accustomed to sharing mind space already. How can we help you? Stuart asked. We wanted to say hello mostly. Check in on your progress. Any luck on building a ship? Stuart looked at Stella and then back at the SFP. We're still refining ores and building up tooling. The SFP tightened together, looking at the amalgams. The center one spoke up again. We see your Infinigan has made progress. We have found his prior tests interesting. Fufang raised his 2 left hands and waved. Thank you. Your splicing, while crude, shows imagination and well-thought-out problem-solving. The SFP warned me about him, but I wanted to offer a trade deal for him as well. The SFP looked up in unison at the Infinigan. Fufang, would you be interested in helping me? Fufang typed in a command, and the amalgams moved back toward him. He looked across the garage at the SFP. What do you need help with? You have an entire world. I have a world, yes, but evolution takes eons. If I like a trait, but want another species to utilize it, it would take generations and potential millennia to make work. You, however, can cut and paste. I want you to make tailored creations for me." Fufeng looked over at the two humans. Stella shrugged, mouthing confusion. He looked back at the SFP. "Like what?" "I would like to start off with bubbles. Can you make bubbles?" Fufeng scratched his neck. Bubbles?" He then pulled his breather away from his mouth and made a large, thick oil spit bubble. It popped abruptly. "Like that?" The SFP shook their upper arms as if they were human heads in unison. "Yes, but no. Life is bubbles. These mountains are difficult for me to exist in. Not enough air up here. Do you think you could make a living bubble? Something that keeps pressure inside?" Fufeng tilted his head and then bobbed his ears. "Maybe. I can think of a few things, but I like the organic rigging to support something like that. There are large light-feeding creatures on numerous worlds that grow in similar fashion. I don't have anything like that in the files, though. As you said, I have an entire world. Grape juice only got through a portion of species here. I can bring you all the DNA you could want." Fufeng looked over at his amalgams, then back up at the SFP. Yeah, I think I can make you some bubbles." Stewart looked back and forth between them and slowly started backing toward the wall. He raised his rifle up. "Well, sounds like you guys have a deal going. Did you need anything else?" "Yes. Did you hear anything about my son?" Callie asked through the SFP. Stella raised her gun up. "Yes. We picked up a message from Josiah that was aimed towards Sam. Jed as well, and they're living in the Kawaru system." She looked at Stewart. Did you want us to maybe ride him?" The SFP shook their upper arms again. "No, I don't know. I'd like them to know I'm okay now, but I don't know if I am. You know?" Stella nodded. "Yeah, the whole Planet Life web thing. Yes, maybe one day. I'm still emotional, kinda random, you know." Stewart laughed. "Oh, I know." Stella glared at him. She looked back at the SFP. "You've been through a ton. Keep in touch with us. If you need anything, ask. No need to go through this alone." Stewart looked at her. "I don't think she's alone, Stella." The SFP looked back at Fufeng. "I will make a camp at the base of the mountain near the clearing by the stream. I will have samples for you. If you can make some biopsy kits or syringes, that help." Fufeng bobbed his ears. "We got a good forge room. I'll make a bunch for you and bring them down." She had the SFP bow. "Thank you all again. Sorry about being creepy weird." Stella waved her off. "Don't worry about it. You've been through a lot." The SFP waved and started walking back along the red cord down the mountain. Stella and Stewart stood side by side, staring out across the sunny valley. The Gree of the Mines watched it all through the camera feeds and slowly started the sequence shutting the Titanic garage doors. The man was walked in the middle of a formation of 2 Craddock, 2 Infinigan, and 2 mechanized Scribbler Knights, bound at the wrists with metal cuffs. The security detail marched him through the depths of the massive Twain station, farther and farther from the brig he had been held in for the last 2 weeks. The corridors blended into each other, curves coupled with straightaways one after the other, causing him to lose his bearings. He was distracted during a long stretch of the walk as he lost focus, having to look down at the misty floor to not trip over the herds of green, cytoplasmic creatures that herded in step with him. The detail exited out from the inner corridors and onto the main mall. Disgust crept over the man's face as he looked around the high-walled ring. Creatures of various forms and shapes walked past them, their faces, bodies, and protrusions confusing and unreadable to him. The 2 large creatures bearing swords on their arms gruffed at one another, pointing at a large door across the main concourse from them. Dozens of floating, fiery-colored feathered creatures wafted in and out of the door. The 2 metal soldiers pushed him forward. The man started walking toward the door. The detail entered the habitat, noise and discordant music blaring from deep inside. The walls reverberated, and colored lights shone through walls of thick glass. He kept walking as instructed. Deep inside, the room was dark except for the lasers flickering above and below. The sounds were violent, shaking his lungs and chest. In the air all above him, the floating feathery creatures pivoted in a higher layer of gas, the music sending waves through the air, causing them to contort. Another shove from behind, and he started moving again. He walked across the room and then saw another human. He recognized the man, and he stood up from his table, smiling, ready to greet him. Sam Clemens held his open palm out and showed an ear communicator in it. He made eye contact and then proceeded slowly to place the comm device into the prisoner's right ear. Sam touched his own ear, speaking. "Can you hear me?" The din of the noise was considerable, but he heard the president of the Clouders' words. "I hear you." Sam smiled, motioning toward a seat at the table. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Hugo. I've gone over your files and read the reports. Please sit." He stared cold-faced at Sam. "General Selleck." Sam laughed. "The human United Worlds aren't so united anymore, Hugo. Your titles no longer hold the weight you think they do. They do to my people. That's what I summoned you here to talk about. Please sit, General Selleck." Hugo looked at the offered chair and went to sit down, but stopped. He looked at Sam and then back toward his cuffs. Sam waved at the Infinigan officers. One quickly reached over and uncuffed the man. Hugo nodded and sat down in the chair. Sam waved over a grazer server. "Glass of mead for the both of us." She quivered her vertical mouth, chittering in series of snorts and clicks. "Yes, sir. I'll have it right out." Sam nodded, and then looked over at the general. Was it a long trip? General Selleck stared at Sam for a moment. "Skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" "You know, Hugo, I was a gamer growing up." "Makes sense. Unpure from youth." Sam laughed. "Colony world. Not a lot to do, you know? We weren't tied into any mother nets or anything. Just a small network of gamer colony kids. Just wasting time outside of chores and school. You know what we played?" "You obviously played too much," Hugo replied. Sam relaxed in his chair, looking out over the mass of flailing Fuimos. He looked back at the general. "Meraxis. You ever heard of it?" Hugo shook his head. "I was raised on the word, not some sacrilegious mental masturbation." Sam gave a curt smile, quickly letting it fade. "You can learn a lot from games, General. In reality, all they are simulations." Sam leaned in, just out of reach from a lunge. "Meraxis was a VR resource-building game. I loved it. You know why I loved it?" He leaned back. "Don't answer that. I don't want any more snark." He smiled as the grazer returned and handed him his mead. He took it and sat it down. He looked back at Hugo. "I loved it because it allowed me to understand people." Sam took a deep drink, his air vents under his shirt sucking in fresh air while he slurped the entire mug down. He slammed it empty to the table and stared at Hugo. "Some people love building things, Hugo. They can't help it. They will make and make and make. While other people love to steal and wreck things. Beautiful thing about games is you can come back. No matter how many times assholes kill you, you can keep building. I came up with a philosophy about it. You want to hear it?" The general lifted his glass and took a sip. He sat it back down. "Do I have a choice?" Sam shook his head, smiling. "No, you don't." Sam shifted in his chair and waved the grazer for another mead. "See, Hugo, I loved old Earth shows. I watched all I could find in the records. My favorite was this one with dancing puppets. It sounds silly, but it was beautiful." Sam laughed to himself. "These things, they just danced all the time. They sang, partied, and ate these sticks all the time. They were eternal children. Life was a party for these puppets. They lived their life thinking party and dancing were just in all there was." "And someone taught them lessons, right?" Hugo asked. Sam shook his head. "That's the thing, General Selleck. The sticks they ate, another race of smaller puppets made them from harvested vegetables in the soil. They built massive structures that these giant dancing creatures devoured. Well, one of the dancers noticed the dynamic, and in her heart she taught them all to stop eating the smaller creatures' buildings. You know what happened? Hugo sighed. The smaller creatures were able to relax after finally finishing their buildings. Sam shook his head. No, they built and built and built until every cavern was full of buildings. It caused a moral shaking of both the builders and the griefers. You see, the builders needed the griefers to clean space for them to build, and the griefers ended up starving. You get what I'm saying? Some people need destroyed. Sam stared at him for a moment. No, not at all. Creation, destruction, it's all tied together. One allows the other, spurring each other onward. Symbiosis. Whatever. Probably a dumb analogy. My point is, I liked building shit. I actually found it funny when others wrecked my stuff, as I could learn to build better from it. Thing is, people die in real life. You can't learn when you're dead, you know. Yup. Are you going to get to a point, Sam? I'm thinking I'd much rather be in my cell. Sam looked across the room and waved. All across the room in the upper gas layer, the Fuimos parted and shivered in unison. The music lowered in volume and shifted melody. A naked woman approached from the far side of the room, walking straight towards their table. Sam turned his attention to Hugo and watched as disgust rolled over the general's face. She got closer and Hugo gasped. Disgusting! What is wrong with her? Sam let a small smile slip to his lips. I also learned a thing about beauty, General. When you make a safe space for people to be themselves, people will often surprise you. He pointed at the woman as she walked up the stairs. My friend Ali here suffers from a severe form of rosacea. Been battling it all her life. Sam looked at the woman. Thank you for letting us be here, Ali. Please don't mind my friend here. He is new to the station. Ali looked at Hugo and gave him a nod. She then proceeded to climb onto the table and lay down. Hugo stared at her zit-covered body for a moment, and then glared over at Sam. What the fuck is this? This is some sick, perverted shit. This is just proving my people's point. Sam shook his head. No, Hugo. This is proving my point. This woman was ostracized for most of her adult life, hiding her skin, hiding her face, hiding from us, from people. Sam raised his hands up. Here, though, among the stars, among alien creatures from worlds I don't even know where, she's a goddess. Sam pointed up at the cloud of circling Fuimos. Hugo, those things up there make their living piloting ships, watching numerous screens, and all sorts of various high-attention tasks. They are very detail-oriented and also very frugal. They splurge on two things. The first is dandelion seeds. They love them. The other is far more rare and considered a delicacy. Sam smiled at Hugo and then waved his hand. The Fuimos descended as a swarm over Ali. Their feathery proboscis tendrils danced over her skin. The hair-sized needles stabbed into her pustules, lapping out the juices inside. Hugo and Sam had to scoot away a bit as the table became covered in the dancing, flailing creatures. Sam watched, eyes wide. Hugo looked around, hoping to escape, but his gaze was quickly met by the 6 guards in turn. He then looked back at the feast as the Fuimos cloud started lifting away from the woman. Sam smiled as the last few creatures danced over her freshly cleaned skin and then lifted off. He stood up and approached the side of the table with his hand outstretched. Ali took it, and Sam lifted her off the table. Thank you, Mr. Clemens. Sam nodded. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. I understand how intimate it is. It was an honor. She nodded at him, and then started walking back down the stairs. Sam returned to his seat and pulled out a small red tendril out of his mead. He then proceeded to take a small sip of it. He stared at Hugo. That woman has made a fortune getting paid to have spa-quality skin peels. That kind of shit can't happen if people are busy damning one another, calling each other abominations or whatever. Hugo choked down his stomach contents. That That was utterly disgusting to witness. Sam nodded. It may be, but all parties involved are okay with it. Hugo blinked slowly, recomposing himself. He then stared at Sam. I'll repeat myself. What do you want, Sam? Well, General, I want you and your people too to figure out a way to integrate. Back on that cold exoplanet, your people still listen to you. Some have adapted and are busy working at becoming whatever they want out here, but not many. I've funded programs. Cammy has initiated programs, but still, low turnout. You can change that. What? You want me to tell my people to ignore our traditions? Turn their back on their faith? Hugo shook his head. No, I'm not going to do that. You're right. You don't have to. You can all stay in your cells and grow old if you want, but I don't want that. I would rather you all adapt, become part of something new out here. Hugo shook his head. This isn't new, Sam. Perversion has always been around. Laziness, greed, filth, deprivation has existed since the dawn of man. This is just the newest attempt at it. General Selleck stared at Sam. You're going to fail just like every other cult leader. Sam shrugged. Maybe. He leaned in. But maybe this time something might stick. Maybe, just maybe, we're at a point where we stop giving each other grief. Maybe we all might start trying to find our own specific niches and learn to be more symbiotic rather than predatory. Sam leaned back in his seat. Think about it, Hugo. Your people can live full lives out here. There are infinite options. We just gotta find some that work. General Selleck blinked slowly. Can I go back to my cell now? Sam strummed his fingers on the table. It's this or call me, bud. Hugo nodded. Out comes the big stick. Going to feed us to that monster, eh? Your people have a choice, and every one of you is going to have to make it. Either learn to live out here with us or get reprogrammed to live in there with her. You expect me to have anything but disgust for you? You've sided with the very devil herself. You're feeding your own people to her. You're a monster, Sam. All of this, it's hell. Feed me to her all you want. I accept my fate. Maybe it was what we were destined for from the beginning. The general stood up quickly and threw his chair at one of the scribblers. The scribbler blocked with its forearm. One of the Craddock officers reached over and quickly pinned Hugo's arms. The Infinigan officer stepped over quickly with the cuffs and reapplied them. Hugo struggled a bit and spat at Sam. I hope you do fail, Sam. I hope to see your face again in the Rogue Mother. You're damning us all, and you welcome it. Sam lifted his hand and waved them to take him back. The detail left out through the large front doors. Sam lifted his glass up, downing the mead in one slurp,